Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. Between 1986 and 1989, Virginia's historic Colonial Parkway became a hunting ground for what many believe was one of America's most methodical killers. 8 young people, 4 couples, would lose their lives along this scenic 23-mile stretch of road, their vehicles staged like macabre theatre sets. But what made these murders truly chilling was the killer's apparent knowledge of police procedures, leading investigators to ask a disturbing question. Could the murderer have been one of their own? Tonight, we'll dive deep into the unsolved mystery of the Colonial Parkway murders, where historic landmarks became crime scenes and lovers' lanes turned deadly. Let's begin. The gentle waves lapped against the shoreline of the York River as dawn broke over the Colonial Parkway on October 12, 1986. The scenic roadway, normally a peaceful route connecting Jamestown to Yorktown through Virginia's historic triangle, was about to become the stage for a series of brutal crimes that would haunt the region for decades to come. That morning, park rangers discovered an abandoned white Honda Civic, partially concealed in the dense brush off the parkway. Inside were the bodies of Kathleen Thomas, 27, and Rebecca Ann Dowski, 21. The discovery marked the beginning of what would become known as the Colonial Parkway murders, a string of double homicides that would claim 8 lives over 3 years and remain unsolved to this day. Kathleen Thomas was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and served as a stockbroker in Norfolk. Rebecca Dowski was a senior at the College of William and Mary, known for her bright smile and academic excellence. The 2 women had been strangled with nylon rope and their throats had been slashed. What disturbed investigators most was the methodical nature of the crime scene. The killer had carefully cleaned the women's bodies with soap and water, leaving investigators to wonder about the significance of this ritual. The crime scene showed signs of someone with knowledge of police procedures. The car had been wiped clean of fingerprints, and certain evidence appeared to have been deliberately removed or altered. This would become a pattern in the cases to follow, leading to uncomfortable speculation about whether the killer might have law enforcement connections. 3 months passed, and the community began to relax, hoping the brutal murders were an isolated incident. But on April 9, 1987, another young couple disappeared. David Nobling, 20, and Robin Edwards, 14, were last seen at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. Their bodies were discovered 3 days later along the James River, both shot execution style. David's black Ford Ranger pickup truck was found in the refuge's parking lot, keys in the ignition, radio playing, and driver's side window rolled down. Another staged scene that would become characteristic of the killer's signature. The similarities between the cases were striking. Both incidents involved couples in secluded areas. Both showed signs of a skilled perpetrator who knew how to manipulate crime scenes, and both left investigators with more questions than answers. The FBI was called in to assist local law enforcement, but even their resources couldn't unravel the mystery that was unfolding along Virginia's historic parkway. September 1987 brought another devastating blow. Cassandra Lee Haley and Richard Keith Call vanished after their first date on April 10, 1988. Their red Toyota Celica was found abandoned at the York River overlook, doors locked, Keith's wallet and Cassandra's purse still inside. Unlike the previous victims, their bodies were never found, adding another layer of complexity to the investigation. The vehicle's condition suggested the same methodical approach seen in the previous cases. The car had been carefully positioned, and personal items were arranged in a way that seemed deliberately staged. The killer was evolving, becoming more sophisticated in their methods, while maintaining certain signature elements that linked the cases together. As fear gripped the community, theories began to emerge. Some believed the killer was a police officer, or someone with law enforcement training, pointing to the professional handling of crime scenes and the apparent knowledge of investigative procedures. Others suspected a park ranger, noting the killer's familiarity with the parkway's isolated locations and ability to move freely without arousing suspicion. The investigation revealed that the perpetrator likely used a ruse to approach their victims, possibly impersonating a law enforcement officer. This theory was supported by witness statements from Parkway visitors who reported being approached by an unmarked vehicle with flashing lights in the months surrounding the murders. Local law enforcement agencies found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to investigate their own. Background checks were conducted on officers who had access to the Parkway during the relevant time periods. The FBI developed psychological profiles suggesting the killer was likely a white male between 30 and 40 years old, methodical, organized, and familiar with the area. The final known victims in this tragic series were Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps, found dead in September 1989. Their bodies were discovered by hunters in New Kent County, west of the Parkway but sharing similar characteristics with the previous murders. Their vehicle, like the others, had been carefully staged, suggesting the same perpetrator had struck again. As investigators delved deeper into each case, patterns emerged that both connected and complicated the investigation. The killer showed remarkable patience, often waiting months between attacks. They chose victims who were vulnerable but not high risk, targeting couples in locations that provided both privacy for the attacks and easy escape routes. The method of killing varied: strangulation, shooting, and in some cases the cause of death couldn't be determined, but the crime scene staging remained consistent. This suggested someone who was adaptable, yet maintained certain ritualistic elements in their crimes. The killer's ability to control two victims at once indicated physical capability and possibly prior criminal experience. Forensic evidence was frustratingly limited. The killer's careful cleaning of crime scenes and victims left investigators with little to work with. What evidence was collected was processed using the technology available in the 1980s, much of which would be considered primitive by today's standards. Later attempts to re-examine evidence using modern DNA analysis and other advanced techniques have yielded few results. The investigation was further complicated by jurisdictional issues. The murders occurred across different law enforcement boundaries: federal land, state jurisdiction, and local police territories. While agencies attempted to cooperate, the complex web of authority sometimes hindered information sharing and coordinated efforts. As the years passed, the case grew cold, but it never faded from the memory of local law enforcement or the families of the victims. The Colonial Parkway, once known for its scenic beauty and historical significance, became associated with an unsolved mystery that continues to haunt Virginia's historic triangle. The murders changed the way people viewed the Parkway. Young couples stopped visiting the romantic overlooks. Parents warned their children about the dangers lurking in seemingly safe places. The community's sense of security was shattered, replaced by a lingering fear that the killer might still be among them, watching, waiting, perhaps planning another attack. The investigation took a significant turn in 1996 when cold case investigators discovered a series of similar unsolved murders along the East Coast. From North Carolina to Maine, other young couples had been found murdered in their vehicles near scenic overlooks and park areas. While never definitively linked to the Colonial Parkway murders, these cases suggested the possibility of a more extensive pattern of violence that had previously gone unrecognized. One particularly intriguing lead emerged when investigators learned of a former police officer who had worked in multiple jurisdictions along the East Coast during the period of the murders. This individual had been dismissed from several departments for misconduct, including allegations of stalking and unauthorized traffic stops. However, Despite extensive investigation, no concrete evidence could link him to the Parkway murders. The families of the victims refused to let the cases fade into obscurity. They formed support groups, maintained contact with investigators, and used emerging technologies to keep their loved ones' stories alive. The advent of social media and true crime forums brought new attention to the cases, generating fresh tips and theories from amateur sleuths across the country. In 2009, a startling development occurred when it was discovered that crime scene photographs from the Colonial Parkway murders had been shared inappropriately among FBI staff members. Some of these graphic images had even been used in unauthorized training sessions. This revelation not only compromised the integrity of the investigation, but also caused immense pain to the victims' families, who had trusted law enforcement to handle the cases with respect and professionalism. The FBI's handling of the evidence came under intense scrutiny. A comprehensive audit revealed that some physical evidence had been improperly stored, potentially compromising its value for modern forensic testing. This discovery led to a complete reorganization of the evidence storage procedures and a renewed effort to apply contemporary investigative techniques to the existing evidence. The psychological profile of the killer became more refined as criminal behavioral analysis advanced. Experts noted that the perpetrator's careful staging of the crime scenes suggested someone who derived satisfaction not just from the murders themselves, but from controlling the narrative around them. The positioning of vehicles, the cleaning of victims, and the removal of certain evidence items indicated a perpetrator who wanted to create specific tableaus for investigators to find. One theory that gained traction among investigators was that the killer might have been documenting their crimes. The meticulous nature of the crime scenes suggested someone who might have been creating souvenirs or recordings of their work. This theory was supported by the fact that certain personal items belonging to the victims were never recovered, possibly taken as trophies. The killer's apparent knowledge of police procedures led to a thorough examination of law enforcement personnel who had worked in the area during the 1980s. Investigators created a database of officers, park rangers, and security personnel who had access to the parkway during the relevant time period. This process was complicated by the transient nature of military and law enforcement populations in the region, with many potential persons of interest having moved away or died in the intervening years. In 2018, advances in genetic genealogy offered new hope for solving the cases. The technique, which had led to breakthroughs in other cold cases like the Golden State Killer, prompted investigators to re-examine what biological evidence remained from the Colonial Parkway murders. While the results of these tests have never been publicly revealed, sources close to the investigation indicate that partial DNA profiles were obtained from at least 2 of the crime scenes. The geographic profile of the killer became clearer over time. Analysis of the crime locations, combined with witness statements and timing of the attacks, suggested someone intimately familiar with not just the Parkway, but the entire Tidewater region. The killer would have needed to know the schedules of park rangers, the patterns of tourist traffic, and the blind spots in law enforcement coverage. Investigators noted that the attacks seemed to cluster around significant dates or events in the region. Some occurred during holiday weekends, others coincided with local festivals or celebrations. This pattern suggested someone who either planned their attacks around these events for strategic reasons, or perhaps someone whose own schedule was influenced by these regional activities. The possibility of multiple perpetrators was never fully ruled out. While the similar characteristics of the crime scenes suggested a single killer, some investigators believed the variations in murder methods and the complexity of controlling multiple victims pointed to the involvement of more than one person. The theory of a killer working with an accomplice could explain some of the more puzzling aspects of the cases. The impact on law enforcement procedures in the region was lasting. the cases led to significant changes in how different jurisdictions cooperated and shared information. New protocols were established for handling evidence in multiple jurisdiction cases, and training programs were developed to help officers recognize potential serial crimes more quickly. The Colonial Parkway itself underwent changes in response to the murders. Additional lighting was installed at overlooks, emergency call boxes were added, and patrol patterns were altered to provide better coverage of isolated areas. Despite these improvements, many locals still avoid the parkway's more secluded spots, especially after dark. The cases have become legendary among law enforcement training programs, studied as examples of both the complexity of multiple jurisdiction investigations and the importance of proper evidence handling. Criminal justice students still examine the cases, debating theories and analyzing the investigation methods used. As decades passed, some of the original investigators retired or passed away, taking with them valuable institutional knowledge about the cases. However, each new generation of investigators brings fresh perspectives and new technological tools to bear on the mystery. The case files, containing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and analyses, continue to be reviewed and updated as new leads emerge. The enduring mystery of the Colonial Parkway murders serves as a haunting reminder of the limitations of forensic science and investigative techniques in the 1980s, and the challenges of solving cold cases even with modern technology. The killer's ability to operate undetected across multiple jurisdictions, leaving minimal forensic evidence while maintaining signature elements at each crime scene, marks these cases as unique in the annals of American crime history. The passage of time has done little to diminish the impact of these murders on the Virginia Peninsula community. Each October, as autumn leaves begin to color the Colonial Parkway, local residents still remember the young lives lost along this historic route. Memorial services, once attended by hundreds, now draw smaller but no less dedicated groups of family members, friends, and investigators who refuse to let these cases be forgotten. In recent years, advances in forensic technology have offered new avenues for investigation. The emergence of touch DNA analysis, which can detect genetic material from skin cells left on objects, prompted a fresh examination of preserved evidence from the victims' vehicles. While the results remain confidential, sources close to the investigation suggest that previously undetected DNA profiles were recovered from items that had been in storage for decades. The rise of genetic genealogy databases has also provided investigators with powerful new tools. By comparing DNA evidence to profiles submitted by individuals researching their family histories, investigators can now construct detailed family trees that might lead to potential suspects. This technique, which has solved numerous cold cases across the country, continues to be applied to the Colonial Parkway cases. One particularly intriguing development came in 2020 when a former law enforcement officer, now retired, came forward with information about unusual traffic stops he'd witnessed along the parkway during the period of the murders. His detailed account of an unmarked vehicle making stops in a manner inconsistent with department procedures added weight to the theory that the killer may have been impersonating law enforcement. The behavioral profile of the killer has been refined over the years as our understanding of serial offenders has evolved. Criminal psychologists now believe the perpetrator likely held a position of authority in their daily life, someone who was respected in their community but harbored deep-seated needs for control and dominance. The careful staging of crime scenes suggests someone who viewed their murders as performances, with investigators as their intended audience. Advanced geographic profiling techniques, when applied to the Colonial Parkway cases, revealed interesting patterns. The killer's comfort zone appeared to center around the Newport News area, with their activities radiating outward along major transportation corridors. This analysis suggested someone who lived or worked in the region during the 1980s, possibly commuting regularly along these routes. The investigation has also benefited from improved digital record keeping and data analysis. Cold case investigators have created comprehensive databases tracking individuals who lived or worked in the area during the time of the murders, cross-referencing this information with similar cases across the country. This effort has identified several persons of interest who were active in multiple jurisdictions where similar crimes occurred. The possibility that the killer had military connections has gained renewed attention. The Hampton Roads area's large military presence, combined with the transient nature of military personnel, could explain both the killer's familiarity with the region and their subsequent disappearance. Investigators have been working with military archives to identify service members who were stationed in the area during the relevant time period and had law enforcement or security training. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation remains the killer's ability to control two victims simultaneously. Experts suggest this indicates either significant physical capability or, more likely, the use of a ruse that gave them immediate control over their victims. The theory that the killer posed as law enforcement has been strengthened by similar cases where criminals used fake police credentials to gain compliance from their victims. The families of the victims have never given up hope for resolution. They maintain active social media accounts dedicated to the cases, sharing updates and keeping the stories of their loved ones alive. These efforts have generated numerous tips over the years, some leading to promising new lines of investigation. The families have also worked to ensure that new investigators assigned to the cases have access to all historical information and family insights that might aid in solving these crimes. Law enforcement agencies have learned valuable lessons from these cases. The importance of preserving evidence for future testing, the need for better interagency cooperation, and the value of maintaining detailed records have all become standard practices, influenced in part by the challenges faced in the Colonial Parkway investigation. The killer's apparent knowledge of forensic techniques has led some investigators to speculate that they may have had formal training in crime scene investigation. The careful cleaning of victims and removal of evidence suggests someone who understood not just police procedures, but the specific methods used by forensic teams to gather evidence. Recent interviews with retired law enforcement officers who worked the cases have revealed previously undisclosed details about potential suspects who were investigated but never publicly identified. While these individuals were ultimately cleared, the information about why they drew suspicion has helped investigators refine their profile of the killer. The Colonial Parkway itself stands as a silent witness to these unsolved crimes. While still a popular tourist route, certain overlooks and parking areas remain notably empty after dark, avoided by locals who remember the terror that once gripped their community. The parkway's isolated beauty, once its greatest attraction, now serves as a reminder of the vulnerability that the killer exploited. As the investigation continues into its fourth decade, new generations of investigators bring fresh perspectives and modern techniques to bear on these cases. The original case files, now digitized and enhanced with contemporary analysis, provide a foundation for ongoing investigation efforts. While the killer's identity remains unknown, the dedication of law enforcement and the families of the victims ensures that the search for justice will never end. The Colonial Parkway murders remain one of Virginia's most enigmatic criminal cases, a reminder that even the most peaceful places can harbor dark secrets, and that the passage of time does not diminish the impact of such profound losses on a community. As technology advances and new investigative techniques emerge, hope remains that one day the families of the 8 victims will finally learn the truth about what happened to their loved ones along that scenic parkway so many years ago.